It's time for our Neighborhood of the Month feature, and this time we're in Manhattan with the spotlight on the East Village. The area we refer to as the East Village was originally considered part of the Lower East Side, and it was the location of several Dutch boweries, the name given to large farms. If you're thinking that sounds familiar, you're correct. It's where the name the Bowery comes from. The most famous of these boweries was the one which belonged to Peter Stuyvesant, and yes, he was that Stuyvesant, the one whose name can be found all over the city. He was the Director General of the New Netherland colony for 17 years, right up until the colony was ceded to the British. The presence of Dutch farms should come as no surprise, given this was all part of the colony of New Netherland. But what may be surprising to folks is the fact that surrounding these larger farms were enclaves of free or half-free Africans. These black farmers were some of the earliest settlers in the East Village. Their farms were meant to provide a buffer zone between Dutch colonists and the Native Americans who still lived in the area at the time. After the advent of the Commissioner's Plan of 1811, which gave Manhattan its famous grid system, development started to boom in the area. And in the early 1800s, the area was one of the richest neighborhoods in the city. Bond Street in the 1830s was considered the street to live on if you wanted to be extra fancy. And some vestiges of this prestige remain in the form of structures like Colonnade Row and Federal-style townhouses seen throughout the neighborhood. By the 1850s, wealthier residents started moving further north and more immigrant communities started moving in. This resulted in a population boom from 18,000 in 1840 to over 73,000 by 1860. Not enough housing existed to properly house these new arrivals, so tenant houses or tenements started being constructed to address this. Unfortunately, these buildings didn't have nearly enough oversight and regulation, and the owners didn't much concern themselves with their condition, so they became plagued with sanitation and safety issues. Among the immigrant communities which came to the area were Germans, which briefly earned the area the nickname Little Germany, and Eastern European Jews. In fact, in the early 1900s, the area became known as the Yiddish Theater District. The area also had a sizable Ukrainian community, and some hallmarks of that community remain to this day. The area experienced an economic decline starting in the 1930s due to the combination of the Great Depression and the Immigration Act of 1924, which drastically cut the flow of new immigrants to the area. And despite reform efforts, many tenements were declared blighted by the mid-20th century and were subsequently torn down. But starting in the 1950s and 60s, beatniks and other artistically minded folks started moving into the neighborhood, which led to a burgeoning art scene. The neighborhood became fertile ground for countercultural movements, most famously punk rock and the Nuyorican literary movement. This edgy reputation continued to attract folks for decades. To capitalize on this shift, real estate agents started calling the area the East Village to distinguish it from the rest of the Lower East Side beginning as early as the 1960s. And that name has stuck ever since, even though historically no part of the area is considered part of Greenwich Village, but instead the Lower East Side. The East Village is certainly a lot more expensive and mainstream than it previously was, but it maintains a lot of its historic vibes and cultural character. And fortunately, there are many preservation efforts underway to try to maintain that heritage.